So let me know if at any time I'm blocking the image for you. I think I'll sit down. If you're here, you're interested in learning who's seeing and using your work, whether you're interested in compiling a portfolio for a promotion, or you're updating your CV, or you're just curious, we will show you where to find data and how to interpret it. There's a lot of charts and numbers, so we're going to hopefully take away the mystery, like what does the numbers mean? Is a 9 good? What's the colorful chart showing? We'll hopefully explain that. And we'll also show you the metrics you have access to through Pepperdine, both traditional and alternative. Now, most of the metrics we're going to talk about today are best used to track articles, but we will be talking about books and how to figure out who's reading your books. So before we go into the tracking, hunting down, and finding out who's citing your work, you have to lay a good foundation. That foundation is selecting the right journal. Why is selecting the right journal important? This is because no one can cite your article if they haven't seen it. I'll repeat again because it's very important. No one can cite your article if they haven't seen it. So how do you know if people can see your article? There are a few hints with journals. It's really important that your journal is indexed by one of the major publishers. If it's indexed, that means it's searchable. It can be found, read, and then cited. Also, journals are ranked. They have different impact factors. So a journal with a higher impact factor automatically means more people are reading it and they've been citing it in the past. It's not necessary to publish in a high impact factor journal, but it's a good indicator you're going to have eyes on your article, upping your chances of citation. And lastly, you might want to ask yourself if the journal has a means of tracking the metrics of its readers. Do they have a way of seeing who's looking at their artifacts or their articles? So, is it indexed? What's its ranking? And is there a metric system? Because you don't want to start off handicapping yourself by publishing in a really obscure journal, because then there will be no data. All right, so once you have that foundation, you can start looking. So Scopus has lots of information. I'm going to focus first on the profile. The Scopus profile that you have access to through Pepperdine gives you a nice bird's eye view of the author, and it provides information on that author's work. So this is the landing page. It's a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff happening here. I've already pre-searched the authors, so I brought it up. If you landed on this page, you just click to author, search their name, this comes up. I'm going to show Analyze Author Output and wait for that to load. And like I said, it's a nice bird's eye view, so maybe you forget the name of the journal you wrote, but you remember the person you co-authored with. Maybe you're trying to remember who you co-authored with. You can look here. H-index. Here's a great example of a number and a chart. What does it mean? An H-index is measuring the impact of that scientist. So the journal impact is looking at the impact of that journal. H-index wants to look at the impact of that scientist. And to do that, they look at their productivity and their citation impact combined. Why it's both is because they're not interested in measuring the one-hit wonders who publish one article that's a hit and has 1,000 citations. That's citation impact. They also want productivity or output. So they want to look at someone who has breadth and depth, look at their impact as a researcher on the field over time. So that H is measuring the productivity and the citation impact, which is H shows the number of publications and the number of citations per publication. So if your eyes just glazed over, another way of thinking about that is if you have an H index of 5, that's at least you have 5 published articles. Each of those articles has 5 citations minimum. So this one, you see the chart, they have 9 published articles with 9 or more citations each. So that's your H index number. Now, some caveats about the H index. Not everyone has one, and they won't necessarily have a big one. That's because the nature of what H is looking at is going to favor heavy hitters in certain fields who've been publishing topics of interest for a long amount of time. So don't freak out if you don't have an H index or if it looks low. There are other ways to find information about your work besides the H index. Also, a caveat is don't compare your number to just anyone, because different fields have different publication standards or just protocols, so it's not a fair comparison to compare, the sciences and education. That won't be helpful. Another thing to note about the H index is it can change from database to database, and that is because different databases have different journal collections. So maybe some of your articles are in journals that database doesn't have. Also, the range of the access to that journal they have changes. So Scopus has 1996 to present, whereas Web of Science goes back to whatever that institution has subscribed to. Scopus is working on going back to the 70s, but right now it's 1996. So you could have different numbers if you look in different places. So that's just a little caveat about the H index. Back to the other sections of the profile. You can look at your citations by year. If you just want to look at the total overview, maybe that image is helping you track down something. You can see that here. Also, you can look at citations by journal and see which publications, which journals most of your citations are coming from. This chart shows the journals, gives you a percentage, and so you get kind of that nice bird's eye view to jump off and find more data. Let's see. And so I mentioned documents. Moving away from the profile and the person, you can look at the metrics for one document. Maybe you're curious about a specific article. There are two ways to look up documents. You can do traditional or alternative. So traditional is citation tracking. How many people have mentioned your work in their published work? And you can find that from Google, EBSCOhost, and Scopus all track how many people are citing your work in different ways. So you have access there, and we can always help you search for that information. Another thing with this is, maybe you have 4 citations, maybe you have 64 or 400. What does it mean? Like, what's good? There's no rubric, standard rubric, 4 is average or below average. You have to put your number, you have to make a scale for yourself. And you can do that by, again, looking at your field. Again, don't compare across fields because it's not going to be a fair comparison. And you also might want to consider comparing your field to other universities, because different universities have different requirements about how much they have to teach versus research. So you want have a fair comparison across universities. And then you're also going to be interested in looking at the time frame. It'll be unfair for you to compare your 3-year impact to a 25-year impact. So those are things to consider, and when you start looking at other people publishing in the similar field with those parameters, then you'll get an idea of where you're falling. And one thing I want to say before we move on to Altmetrics is that impact is not the same as quality. It's not the whole picture. Stats and data need to be explained. So if you get into a high-ranking journal, maybe you don't have a lot of citations, but just getting your paper accomplished is something to put on your CV and talk about, because it's usually harder to get accepted into those journals. And maybe you're not going to have a lot of citations because your topic is very niche and there's a smaller group of people talking about that topic, so you're not going to have hundreds of citations. It will always be small. So numbers aren't everything. You have to put them in context. Also, sometimes papers are cited a lot because they're wrong and everyone's refuting them. So it's not always good to have more. You need that place the numbers in context. Don't freak out if your numbers are low. Mark, do you want to talk about Altmetrics?
Oh, sure.
because it takes a while for your citations to get published.
Yeah, generally when people speak about Altmetrics, they're talking about metrics outside of the traditional scholarly citations. Usually as examples, they talk about social media platform mentions like Twitter and Facebook, but that's only one type of Altmetric. Another example is usage, like how many people have downloaded your article, how many people have read your article. Another example is when people download a citation to your work into a reference manager such as Mendeley or RefWorks, because at some point they might work that into their research. So that's another type of Altmetric indicator. The publisher Wiley did a poll surveying faculty. They showed some examples of metrics and they said, do you think this would be helpful to you? 65% thought that the metrics were useful, and 77 agreed or strongly agreed that they added value to journal articles. But there was another study from some librarians where they surveyed their faculty, and only 7% were either familiar or extremely familiar with them. So I see a gap between the possible usage and how much that they're actually being used at this point. So I'm going to go back to the profile of a really talented researcher at GSBM. Now, he had an article written in 2015, and he has 2 citations. That's actually pretty good for an article that was only written in 2015 because of the slow process of peer review. But the Altmetrics are much more immediate. If you have a more recent article, it's much easier to find some stats immediately. And Scopus actually purchased a company called Plumx Metrics, which tracks these indicators. So I'm going to go to that page. Okay, here at the bottom they have some of the indicators they found. They have usage. They talk about abstract views in EBSCO. EBSCO is we have several databases from EBSCO, such as PsycInfo and Business Source Premier. We have some education databases as well. So they have the abstract views and the link outs. The link outs is when somebody tried to access the full text. Now this is not capturing everything, because EBSCO is not the only database which has articles. There's also ProQuest as well. So at this point there isn't one one place that we could send you that's going to have everything. Then they have the just going to go back to that page. We have the captures. Now the captures, I like to think of a greater level of commitment. That's where somebody downloaded a citation to your work into something like RefWorks or Mendeley, and they might be using it later in their research. And then you don't see any mentions of social media for this, and this is okay because look at the title. It's they're mentioning audit fees and audit delay. Generally, something is not going to be mentioned in social media unless it has some sort of appeal to the general public. So don't feel bad depending on your topic. If you're writing article on calculus in a math journal, there's probably not going to be thousands of tweets about it. And then also what I would do is I would go to the article homepage. So I'm going to go find full text. I'm just going to pull up the article. It was from a publisher, Emerald, which is a major publisher. And some of the major publishers have actually been tracking a lot of metrics. So, okay, so here we go. It's going to, right here it shows this article was downloaded over 1,500 times. So even though it's only a 2-year article, he can say, you know, over 1,500 people have read this article. So that really speaks to are people reading my research? And if he was up for a review, everyone's going to know there are not going to be a lot of citations for a 2015 article, but he could show over 1,500 people viewed this article. I'm going to show another example. I'm going to do another type of search. And this is from a Pepperdine psychology professor. And this is a topic that's going to have more interest from the general public. So she was writing on sex work and mental health, the study of women in the Netherlands. And I'm going to go to the Plumx again. And this was written in August 2017, so this is a really new article. This one was, it's only like a couple of months old. It shows she has 31 tweets. Well, 15 tweets, 16 retweets. And I think that she should get credit for this because she showed that she's doing research that's of interest to people outside of the academic realm and has the greater societal impact. So she should get credit for the broad appeal of her work. Every researcher is going to come up with different types of metrics. If you're a chemistry professor, you're probably not going to have the tweets, but for her it's relevant. If you're working on something like cyberbullying, maybe social media would be relevant. I'm going to do one last search here. I'm going to go back to Scopus and. In this article, it's longer contact times increase cross-contamination of enterobacter. So basically they were testing the 5-second rule that if food falls on the floor, is there a lot of bacteria attached to it? So that, as you could probably guess, that's something that's more likely to get a lot of popular appeal. So I'm going to go to the details. And it shows that they have 1 blog mention, 6 news stories, and 13 tweets. Now, generally speaking, Plumx is very good at tracking all metrics, but let's say this researcher thought, I feel like I was mentioned in more news stories. It's good to always check in more than one spot. There is a free bookmark application called Altmetrics. And as long as you have a DOI on the page, this will come up. So here, when I pull up Altmetrics, as good as Plumx is, it missed quite a bit. So that's why I always tell faculty to check several places. So here it was mentioned in 249 news outlets. In 24 times in blogs. So Plumx was good. It's a starting point, but I would also download this application as well. It's just a free one that you could drag to your toolbar. I'm going to go back to the page for the article. I'm going to click on Find Full Text for this one, and I'm just going to go to the publisher page now. This article is what they call open access. It's freely available on the web, and it's not hidden behind a paywall. And when I go to the article usage statistics, it shows this article. It was only a year old. It was downloaded over 12,000 times, and the full text was read 873. The abstract 43,000. I would say it's popular for 2 reasons. That's a lot of downloads. I looked at quite a few articles, and it's very rare to have this many downloads. I would say two reasons. One, all the mention in the popular press, blogs, and news stories, and people would go back and Google it. The other reason why so many people actually got the PDF is it's open access. It's not hidden behind a paywall. So if you do happen to publish in a good open access journal, it's a lot easier for people to read your research if it's open access. And another resource which I've shown a few examples is it's always good to to look at the publisher website. This is from a couple of Pepperdine professors. It's examining cultural intelligence and cross-cultural negotiation effectiveness. And this one, it's 3 years old. It was downloaded 1,500 times. So it's a lot easier for us to track metrics for you if you publish in journals with these tools. I'll show you a negative example. This is the Journal of Behavioral Studies in Business. Now, right off the bat, I could see that the web page looks like it's from the 90s. It doesn't look like a super sophisticated platform. I've seen web pages like this where the editor has an AOL account for their email. And I've gone to the point where when a faculty member asks me to track metrics, when I look at the journals they published in, I could almost tell ahead of time how much I'm going to find. Like this one doesn't have any metrics, so you have no idea how many times somebody's read your articles. It's not indexed in Scopus, so it's a lot harder to show impact. Now, you could write a very good article in this journal, so impact is not the same as quality. There might be some brilliantly written articles here, but the faculty who wrote them would have a really tough time coming up with some metrics, though. Okay, the other question I get is from people in the humanities, and they say, "What about books?" Or sometimes people in education and psychology write books as well, or even business, and they say, you know, all these metrics really just focus on the article level rather than the book, and that's true. Metrics for books has lagged, but I'll show you a few strategies to get some information. I'm going to do an example. Stuart Davenport, he's a history professor I work with at Seaver, and he wrote this book, Friends of the Uprighteous Mammon, Northern Christians and Market Capitalism. So it's a very academic title. And when I go in here, this is the catalog that searches almost every library in the country. It shows that close to 1,800 libraries own his book. And I would argue that that's a metric that he could show to his committee. He could say, this is how my work is benefiting other people. That a lot of people have access to this book at a lot of schools. Another possibility is there's something called the Open Syllabus Explorer. What they've done is they've taken over 1 million syllabi, and you could search to see if any of your works are mentioned on someone's syllabi. Now, 1 million is just scratching the surface of all of the syllabi out there, but there's a professor in history, Darlene Rivas, and she wrote a book, Missionary Capitalist Nelson Rockefeller in Venezuela. It was mentioned in 5 syllabi, so that's something that she could show for impact. Is my work is being used on syllabi that faculty at other schools think highly enough of my book that they either assigned it as a reading, or it was on a reading list. It might, you know, in some way people are using this book. So that's one of the metrics that they could use. Another metric is some of the publishers. It's not all of them. Springer and Palgrave Macmillan are doing this. I wish that every single book publisher would do this. All of the university presses would. Here's a book by Joel Fetzer, a poli-sci professor at Pepperdine, on open borders and international migration policy. Palgrave Macmillan has something called book metrics, which is sort of their way of branding all altmetric indicators. And here they have it similar to what you were seeing at the article level. Like there's 13 mentions on social media that I could go to. Like it shows how many mentions. Yeah, it shows mentions on Twitter and Facebook. I could hit the back key and I could look at the usage of the book. It shows the number of downloads from the ebook. Ebooks are becoming more and more prevalent. It even shows which chapters were downloaded the most. The other is links to book reviews. Here's they're showing some excerpts from book reviews. So this gives him some metrics that he could use to show the impact of his book. I was hearing a webinar from an editor in Springer, and he said a lot of faculty, when he would ask them to write a book, they would say, no, I don't want to write a book because it's hard to find metrics. When I'm up for a review, I want an article where I could show the impact factor, all the citations. I don't want to spend a year writing a book and then I can't even find any metrics. So that was the inspiration to get this book metrics out here, so they would get credit for their work as well. So I'm going to go one other, so I'm just going to show a couple of other sources. Scopus, which we were showing, also has some all metric indicators as well. So I'm going to, this is a book from also from a Pepperdine professor. And it's basically, when you go into Plumx, it basically mirrors what I was showing for the articles. That from here, he could look at like PDF views of the book, WorldCat holdings, readers on Mendeley, Goodreads book reviews, how many times people exported something like RefWorks. It has an Amazon review, so they're trying to quantify books a lot more. And last thing I want to show before I open this up to questions is me and Jamie Beth have an info guide for faculty publishing, and I'm just going to go to something called Selected Works. That's an author platform where authors, it's hosted on the library homepage, where faculty authors could put up a profile of all of their works. Here's a professor from public policy. And you're able to have links or downloads depending on the copyright. This handles the copyright for you. And it has a link to all of her works. And each quarter you get a readership report from a selected work showing how many people went to the Pepperdine website to download your work. And if you're interested in signing up, there's some sheets here. You don't even have to create this. If you just write your name, email address, and academic discipline, I could have our digital archives librarian could actually create the profile for you. So if you want to sign this and give it to me before you leave, we will actually set up the profile for you. So at this point, I want to open it up for questions. Me or Jamie Beth could consult with you. We're at the Malibu campus, but we could do things with Adobe Connect if you're at another campus. We could have a consultation with you if you're interested in finding metrics on your works.
Mine is more like a general question.
Oh, sure.
So is there someone going through these articles pulling out the citations, or is it done automatically? Like, what if it's not properly cited, kind of a thing?
Okay, that's a good question. For Altmetrics, it harvests data from the DOI, the digital object identifier. It seems like the process is pretty automated, because when you're in the Scopus articles, just going to go back to show you an example here with. Yeah, sometimes things are not. I notice sometimes faculty do things in their articles where a student would probably get dinged for how they cited it, and because when you pull up his articles, it has in Scopus, at least in Scopus here, it'll have all of his references. So at least in Scopus, it's a highly automated process. And I suspect Google Scholar is the other place where you could see how many times you're cited. There's not as much quality control as in Scopus, but I know with Google Scholar, I'm 100% certain that no one is going through those manually. It's just picking it up. So I know with Scopus, I think they draw it from here.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. I hope that nothing is getting missed. I'm hoping the way they have it laid out here, I'm hoping that there's not too many mistakes or miscues, though. Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts. Also, now that academia.edu is that the one that's being threatened now because.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is why something like selected work is becoming more important, right?
Yeah, exactly. They actually handle the copyright for you in selected works. With selected works, what they do is if there's no copyright issue, like it's a paper that you presented at a conference or a working paper, you could just have it up there as the PDF. But they also have something called open URL. So if a faculty author at another school